It was a quiet evening when Sarah first felt it, the strange, unsettling hum in the air. She was sitting in her small apartment, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating the pages of the book in front of her. The world outside seemed peaceful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She pushed the thought aside, convinced it was just her imagination playing tricks. Little did she know, her life was about to change forever. The night sky outside her window was cloudless, and the stars twinkled brightly, like tiny diamonds scattered across the dark canvas of the universe. But as Sarah turned the page of her book, a sudden bright light filled the room. She looked up in confusion, blinking against the blinding intensity. The light wasn't coming from outside her window. It was coming from above her, as if the very air around her had been replaced by a shining, unnatural glow. Her heart raced. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on her. Her mind screamed for her to move, to do something, but her body felt frozen in place. She was terrified, and yet she couldn't understand why. Then it happened. Before she could even scream, the light intensified, and in a split second, everything went dark. The book in her hands fell to the floor with a soft thud. Forgotten. The last thing she remembered was the strange hum that filled the air. Then there was nothing but a deep, overwhelming silence. When Sarah opened her eyes, she wasn't in her apartment anymore. The world around her was alien, foreign. She lay on a cold, metallic floor, the air thick with the scent of something unnatural. Her head throbbed as if she had been hit by something hard. She tried to sit up, but her body felt weak, as if gravity itself had increased in strength. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim, greenish light surrounding her. She realized she was not alone. Above her, towering figures loomed, creatures that seemed too strange to be real. Their skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, their bodies unnaturally tall and thin. Long, sharp limbs hung by their sides, and their eyes were wide, black voids that seemed to see straight through her. They stared down at her with an emotionless gaze, their expressions unreadable, their features sharp and alien. Sarah's breath hitched as panic began to rise inside her chest. She tried to move, to scream, but her body was heavy and uncooperative. The creatures seemed to notice her struggle. One of them stepped forward, its movements smooth and deliberate. It was holding something, a strange device that hummed with an eerie energy. It looked down at her with cold indifference, as if she was nothing more than an object to be studied. Fear coursed through Sarah's veins, and she instinctively tried to back away. But it was no use. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of which made sense. How did she get here? Why was she here? What did they want from her? The alien creature bent down, its long fingers brushing against her face. She recoiled, her skin crawling under its touch. Its eyes, those dark, soulless eyes, studied her closely, almost curiously. Sarah felt a shiver of dread snake down her spine. These beings were not like anything she had ever imagined. They weren't just aliens. They were something far more terrifying. Their cold, emotionless gaze sent a wave of fear through her, and she realized that her worst nightmare was only just beginning. The creature's voice, when it came, was low and hissing, like the sound of air escaping from a pressure valve. Sarah didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't speaking to her, it was speaking around her. The other creatures gathered, their whispers growing louder as they surrounded her. Her panic began to turn to confusion. She tried to make sense of the situation, to understand what was happening, but it was like trying to grasp smoke with her bare hands. The more she tried to understand, the more disoriented she became. She was no longer in control of her own body, her own thoughts. The alien standing closest to her moved away, and she felt a wave of cold wash over her. The device it was holding sparked to life, glowing a bright, unearthly blue. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as she watched the device hum with power. The alien turned its attention to the device, its black eyes never leaving her. It was then that Sarah realized this was no simple abduction. This wasn't just some random act of violence. They weren't interested in her life, her belongings, or anything she had known. They were here for something much more terrifying. Her fear was matched only by a growing sense of confusion. What did they want with her? Why had they taken her? The last thing she remembered before the darkness had consumed her was her life, the simple, quiet life she had led. Now that life seemed like a distant memory. The unknown stretched out before her, a vast, dark void, and Sarah had no idea how to escape it. The alien turned back toward her. Its black eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, Sarah felt as though she could see its thoughts. A cold, calculating emptiness. She didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. What was about to happen to her would be the catalyst for something no one, not even the aliens, could have predicted. The creatures stood around her, their eerie silence pressing in from all sides. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had no idea where she was, how she got here, or what these beings wanted from her. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The cold, metallic walls of the ship around her seemed to close in, making her feel even more trapped. She tried to push herself up, her body heavy and weak. It was as if the air itself was thicker here, like it was pressing down on her. She felt dizzy, her head spinning from the shock of everything that had just happened. The moment the light had taken her from her apartment, her life had spiraled out of control. She couldn't process it all. Was she dreaming? Was this some strange nightmare she couldn't wake up from? One of the aliens stepped closer, its elongated limbs moving with a strange grace. Its black eyes locked onto hers, studying her with an unsettling intensity. It was as if it was waiting for her to do something, anything. But what could she do? She didn't even know where she was, let alone how to survive in this strange, alien place. The alien reached out, its cold, long fingers hovering just inches from her arm. Sarah flinched, instinctively pulling back, but it was too late. The creature's touch was icy, like it had no warmth, no human presence. It felt unnatural, and Sarah couldn't help but shudder. The alien seemed to notice her reaction, its dark eyes flicking over her, and it gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't angry, nor did it seem to be in a rush. Instead, there was a calm, methodical air about it, as if it had done this before. Suddenly, the alien stepped back and gestured to the others. Sarah couldn't understand their language, but she could see the silent communication between them. They were discussing something, perhaps what to do with her, or maybe how to handle her reactions. It was as if she was nothing more than a puzzle for them to figure out. Her head continued to spin, but she forced herself to sit up fully, her eyes scanning the room. The walls around her were smooth, almost polished, and the floor was made of the same cold material. There were no windows, no doors, only strange lights embedded in the ceiling, casting an eerie, greenish glow over everything. The air smelled unfamiliar, sterile, and something else, something metallic. Her mind tried to make sense of it all, but every time she came close to understanding, her thoughts were interrupted by the cold touch of reality. The fear was like a heavy weight on her chest, and her breathing became shallow. She didn't know what was going to happen to her, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay here, trapped like this. A low hum filled the air, and Sarah looked up to see the alien with the strange device moving toward her again. It was holding something in its long hands, an object that seemed to shimmer with a faint blue light. It wasn't the same as the bright light that had taken her, but it was just as unsettling. The device seemed to vibrate softly in the creature's grasp as it came closer. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, and she instinctively tried to back away. But her body wouldn't obey. The weight of the air, the pressure around her, kept her from moving fast enough. The alien leaned down, its cold eyes never leaving hers, and she felt a rush of panic. The creature didn't seem to be angry, but there was something in its gaze that made her feel like she was about to be studied, an object to be analyzed. It pointed the device toward her, and she felt a strange sensation wash over her, as if the air itself was charged with energy. The device hummed louder, and Sarah's body reacted, a cold shiver running down her spine. She gritted her teeth, trying to remain calm. She couldn't show them fear, not now. They didn't know her, didn't understand what she was capable of. The aliens thought she was weak, that she was just another human to be studied, to be manipulated. But Sarah was stronger than they knew. For the first time since her abduction, something inside her clicked. The fear, the confusion, all of it, she could use it. It was the only thing she had left. The aliens hadn't broken her yet. They had no idea that the more they pushed, the more they tested her, the stronger she would become. They were making a mistake, but Sarah wasn't ready to show them that just yet. She needed to wait. She needed to understand them, to learn how they operated before she could make her move. As the alien held the device in front of her, her mind raced, calculating every possible outcome. There was no way she was going to let them control her. Her fingers twitched, and a quiet, determined thought ran through her mind. This is just the beginning. She was far from helpless, and these aliens, with all their advanced technology and power, were about to learn just how wrong they were to think they could break her. The strange hum in the air seemed to grow louder, and Sarah could feel it vibrating through her bones. It was as if the very ship she was in was alive, breathing, watching. The aliens had stopped moving, but they were still staring at her, those deep, dark eyes fixed on her every movement. Their silence was suffocating, making the moments drag on longer than they should have. Time seemed to stretch out in a way that made it hard to tell if minutes or hours had passed. Sarah's mind raced, trying to gather any shred of information she could use to her advantage. She had been taken by these beings, thrown into an alien world that she couldn't understand. But there was one thing she knew for certain. She had to keep calm. She couldn't let her fear show. Not now. Fear was weakness, and these aliens thrived on that. They believed she was fragile, incapable of standing up to them. But Sarah wasn't about to prove them right. Her body still felt weak, and the strange pressure in the air made it hard to think clearly. She had no idea what they were planning to do next, but she wasn't going to just sit back and let them control her fate. She had to find a way to fight back, to make them realize that she wasn't like the others they had encountered. Slowly, she forced herself to sit up straighter, ignoring the dizziness that tried to cloud her mind. The alien standing in front of her raised its head slightly, its eyes narrowing, as if it could sense the shift in her demeanor. But it made no move to stop her. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if it were curious. She realized then that these creatures weren't like anything she had ever encountered in her life. They didn't seem to fear her, but they were cautious, and that gave her an opening. Caution was the key to their understanding, the thing they didn't quite grasp about humans. Sarah's thoughts turned back to her past. She had always been someone who found a way through every obstacle life had thrown at her, whether it was the small challenges in her daily life or the bigger ones that tested her character. She had never backed down. It was the one thing that had kept her going, even when everything seemed hopeless. She didn't know how to give up. And now, more than ever, that trait was going to serve her well. The alien nearest to her moved again, and Sarah instinctively tensed, her body preparing for whatever was coming next. But instead of moving toward her, it turned and began speaking to the others in its strange, clicking language. The tone was soft, almost neutral, but Sarah didn't trust it. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the shift in their voices. The other creatures stood in a loose circle around her, watching, waiting. Sarah's mind was still focused on one thing: escape. She had no idea how, but she had to find a way. There was no place for her to run, no exit she could see, but she knew there had to be a weakness. Every system, every machine, no matter how advanced, had a flaw. She just had to find it. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, just enough to focus on her surroundings. Her eyes scanned the room again, studying the details. The walls were smooth, but there were faint seams running along them, suggesting that parts of the room could open or move. The strange device the alien had held earlier was still in the corner of the room, glowing softly. Her thoughts turned to the creature holding the device. It had shown no emotion when it touched her, no sign of aggression. In fact, it had almost seemed fascinated. Maybe that was the key. If she could get close to the device without alarming them, perhaps she could learn something, or at the very least, use it to her advantage. The thought was both a plan and a gamble, but it was all she had. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The creature wasn't looking at her directly now, its attention on the other aliens in the room. The others were still watching her, but they weren't paying as much attention. It was her chance. With her body still feeling sluggish from whatever the aliens had done to her, Sarah forced herself to move slowly, carefully. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing slightly as her legs trembled beneath her. The movement was almost imperceptible, and the aliens didn't seem to notice at first. Sarah's heart beat faster as she inched closer to the glowing device, each step taking her deeper into enemy territory. She could feel the eyes of the creatures on her, but she refused to let fear take hold. Every movement had to be deliberate, every step calculated. The device seemed harmless enough, just sitting there, waiting. But Sarah knew better than to underestimate anything in this strange, hostile place. As she reached the device, she paused, her hand hovering just above it. The surface of the device hummed with energy, and Sarah could feel the faint vibrations in her fingers. She wondered what it could do. Was it a weapon, a tool of some kind, or was it just something the aliens used to study her, to manipulate her? She didn't have much time to think. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached out and touched the surface. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of energy coursed through her, causing her muscles to tense. The device hummed louder, its light flashing brighter. Sarah jerked her hand back in surprise, but the device remained unchanged. But something inside her clicked. The aliens had underestimated her, and now she had the upper hand. The device might not have been what she expected, but it had given her a clue. It was a start. Now she needed to keep her focus and find a way to use what she had learned. The aliens were still watching, still waiting, but they had no idea what was coming. Sarah's determination burned brighter than ever. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't the end of her story, it was just the beginning. The atmosphere in the alien ship had changed. The creatures surrounding Sarah were still watching her, but now there was a sense of hesitation, as if they were unsure of what to expect next. The alien with the strange device had taken a step back, its dark eyes narrowing in thought. Sarah could feel their gaze on her, and for the first time, she felt a surge of power in her chest. It was as if she had just unlocked a new part of herself, a part that was no longer willing to be a passive observer in her own fate. Her hand still tingled from touching the device, and though the sudden burst of energy had left her with a sense of unease, she didn't let it distract her. Her mind was already working through the next steps, calculating every possible move she could make. The ship was unfamiliar, but she was beginning to notice small details, things she had missed before. The lights in the ceiling were arranged in a pattern, and the walls, though smooth, had faint, almost imperceptible seams running along their surfaces. These were signs that the ship wasn't as invincible as it seemed. As Sarah took a slow step forward, she noticed that the aliens were still not reacting immediately. They were watching her, yes, but their movements had become less certain. They hadn't expected her to stand up, let alone move closer to the device. They had assumed that once they had her contained, she would be too weak to do anything. But Sarah wasn't weak. She wasn't going to let them control her, not now. She had seen something in their eyes, curiosity, maybe even uncertainty. And that was her chance. She couldn't take on their entire ship, but she didn't need to. All she needed was a moment, a single crack in their calm demeanor, and she could exploit it. Her mind shifted to her environment once again. The room was quiet, and the aliens hadn't moved to stop her. They were still speaking in their soft, clicking language, but their voices had grown quieter, more distant. The creature with the device had turned slightly, its attention now focused elsewhere. Sarah's heart began to race, and for a moment, she thought about all the things she had left behind. Her life, her friends, the world she knew. But those thoughts had to stay in the past. She couldn't afford to be distracted. The present was all that mattered now. Sarah took another step, her eyes locked on the glowing device in the corner of the room. She could feel the hum of its energy vibrating through the air, and the closer she got, the more she understood. It wasn't just a tool. It was a power source, something that the aliens relied on to maintain their hold over her, to control her every move. And now that she understood its importance, she knew she had to do something about it. Her breath steadied as she approached the device again. This time, she wasn't just touching it out of curiosity. She was trying to understand it, to figure out how it worked. Her fingers brushed lightly against the surface, and the hum grew louder, almost as if the device was responding to her touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to focus. There was something in the way the energy flowed, something that seemed familiar. Her mind raced, trying to remember anything from her past that might give her a clue about what she was dealing with. And then it hit her. Back when she was younger, she had spent hours tinkering with old electronics and machines. It had been a hobby, something she did to pass the time. She had always been good with technology, able to figure out how things worked, even when no one else could. This, whatever it was just another machine, a machine she could understand if she gave herself the chance. Slowly, she began to run her fingers along the edges of the device, searching for a button, a switch, anything that could help her control it. She could feel the energy pulsing, almost like a heartbeat, and with every pulse, she felt more connected to it. It wasn't just a piece of alien technology. It was a part of the ship, part of the very system that was keeping her trapped here. The aliens around her were still unaware of her growing connection to the device. They were busy discussing something in their language, their backs turned to her. Sarah could feel the opportunity slipping away. She had to act quickly. Her fingers found something, a small indentation along the side of the device. It was barely noticeable, but to her trained eye, it was exactly what she had been looking for. She pressed it gently, holding her breath as the device's hum grew louder. The light from the device flickered once, then twice. Something shifted in the air, and for the first time, Sarah felt a slight change in the room. The walls, once so cold and impenetrable, seemed to vibrate with a new energy. The ship was reacting to her touch, responding to the very power she was trying to control. She didn't have much time. The creatures were still occupied with their discussion, but Sarah could sense that they would turn around at any moment. The device was growing warmer in her hands, its energy expanding, and she knew that whatever happened next could change everything. She took another deep breath, steadying her mind. She had to be careful. Every move had to be precise. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. With a final, determined motion, Sarah pushed the indentation deeper. A soft click echoed through the room, and then the device hummed louder than before. The lights surrounding it intensified, bathing the room in an eerie glow. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a sudden surge of energy, the ship's systems seemed to reboot. The lights flickered and then steadied. The air around her seemed to shift, becoming lighter, less oppressive. She had done it. She had activated something that was now in her control. The aliens stopped speaking. Their heads turned toward her in unison, their black eyes locking onto hers. They had felt the change, and they knew that something had shifted. The calm, methodical beings who had once seemed so sure of themselves now looked uncertain. Sarah had done the impossible. She had disrupted their control over the ship. But this was only the beginning. Sarah knew that she had to keep her focus. There was no turning back now. She had taken the first step toward gaining control of her own fate. The aliens might have underestimated her, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The aliens stood motionless, their eyes fixed on Sarah, with a mix of disbelief and unease. The hum from the device she had activated resonated through the air, creating a strange rhythm that seemed to mirror her quickening heartbeat. For a moment, she thought she might have pushed too far, but then she remembered. Their reactions were exactly what she needed. They were no longer in control. She was the one holding the key now, the one who had managed to disrupt their hold on the ship. Despite the power she had just gained, Sarah knew that this wasn't the time to celebrate. She had to act quickly. The aliens might have paused in confusion, but they weren't going to stay that way forever. She could see the shift in their posture, a subtle change that spoke volumes. They were recalculating, reassessing her. And that meant they were dangerous. They had underestimated her before, but they wouldn't make the same mistake again. Sarah took a slow step back, her gaze flicking around the room. The walls, which had once seemed unyielding and cold, now appeared more fragile. She could see the faint seams in the structure, the patterns that indicated the ship could be altered, opened. Her mind raced as she pieced together the information she had gathered. There were systems in place, systems she had activated, but they were also systems that could be reversed, systems she had to learn how to control before the aliens figured out how to stop her. She turned her attention back to the aliens, who were now discussing something among themselves. Their voices were low, murmurs in their strange language that Sarah couldn't understand. But the way their bodies shifted told her everything she needed to know. They were nervous. They were planning. And that was when she heard it, the soft, mechanical whir of a door opening behind her. Sarah's heart leaped in her chest. There was no time to waste. She had no idea what the door led to, but the fact that it had opened meant she had another opportunity. She could either stay here, waiting for them to regain their composure, or she could take this chance and move forward. There was only one option. Sarah turned toward the door, her feet moving before her mind could second-guess the decision. She glanced at the aliens one last time, but they didn't seem to notice her movement. Their attention was still divided between each other, their focus on the device, and whatever plans they were now forming. Sarah could feel the pulse of the ship beneath her feet as she crossed the room, every step bringing her closer to a chance at escape. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, and Sarah found herself in a narrow corridor. The lighting was dim, but she could see enough to know that it was far less sterile than the room she had just left. There were strange markings on the walls, symbols she couldn't read but that felt familiar, almost comforting. It was as though she were walking through the heart of the ship, where the pulse of its technology was strongest. For a brief moment, Sarah felt the weight of isolation. She was alone, surrounded by an alien world that made no sense, in a place that she had never imagined could exist. But that feeling quickly passed. She had a goal now, a path forward. Every step took her closer to the answers she needed. As she walked, her mind raced. What had the aliens been planning to do with her? Why had they taken her? There were no clear answers yet, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that their actions were more than just random cruelty. There was a pattern, a method to their madness. They had studied her, observed her reactions, learned from her weaknesses. But Sarah wasn't the same person they had first captured. She was more than they realized. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the aliens following her. But the corridor remained empty, save for the soft echoes of her footsteps. It was strange, she thought, how quiet the ship seemed now. Before, it had been alive with energy, filled with the hum of its systems. Now, everything felt almost too still, like the calm before the storm. Sarah turned a corner and found herself in front of another set of doors, this time larger, more imposing. The surface was etched with intricate symbols, much like the ones in the corridor. She hesitated for only a moment before reaching out to touch the door. It was cool to the touch, smooth yet somehow rough in a way she couldn't explain. The ship seemed to be alive, as if it were breathing in sync with her. Without warning, The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast room beyond. The space was dimly lit, with strange machines lining the walls. It looked like a command center of some sort, with terminals glowing softly in the low light. The air felt different here, more charged, more intense. This was where the heart of the ship lay, and Sarah knew that whatever happened next would be crucial to her survival. Her eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of it all. There were more of the same alien symbols, but there were also faint traces of something else, something that resembled human technology. It was subtle, almost like a forgotten memory, but Sarah could recognize it. It was the faint outline of a control panel, one that could be used to manipulate the ship's systems. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. There were more buttons and switches than she could count, but she had learned enough by now to know which ones to avoid and which ones to focus on. She reached for the nearest terminal and pressed a button. The machine hummed softly, and a holographic screen flickered to life in front of her. It displayed a series of symbols that she couldn't fully understand, but some of them were familiar enough to recognize. Her fingers hovered over the controls, and a sense of urgency began to fill her. She had no idea how long she had before the aliens realized what she was doing, before they stopped her. Every second counted. Taking a deep breath, she pressed another button. The symbols on the screen shifted, and the ship's systems flickered in response. A series of beeping sounds echoed through the room, followed by a soft tone that felt like a warning. Something was changing. It was happening. She was gaining control. The ship was responding to her commands. But she knew that the real test was about to begin. The aliens wouldn't let her take control without a fight. And this time, she would be ready. As Sarah stood there, her fingers resting lightly on the controls of the alien ship, she felt the weight of everything that had led her to this moment. She was no longer just a prisoner, no longer just a victim of their cold, calculated plans. She was something else now, a force of nature that had learned to adapt, to survive, and to take back what was rightfully hers. She could feel the ship around her, its systems responding to her commands, its pulse matching her own steady breath. But she knew she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, and there was still so much left to do. The beeping on the control panel grew louder, more insistent, as if the ship itself were trying to warn her. The energy in the room shifted, and she could sense the aliens, even though she couldn't see them. Their presence lingered in the air, a heavy, oppressive force that seemed to press in from all sides. They were coming. She could feel it. They would not let her escape their grasp so easily. But Sarah was ready. With a deep breath, she pressed another button. This time, the screen flickered, and a new set of symbols appeared. These were different, more intricate, but Sarah recognized the patterns. The control panel was giving her access to the very core of the ship's systems. She had always been resourceful, and her knowledge of technology, though human, had become her greatest asset. Every press of a button, every flick of a switch, felt like a small victory, like she was carving a path forward. The ship responded with a low rumble, and Sarah's eyes widened as she watched the room shift around her. The walls, once solid and unyielding, now seemed to ripple, as though the very fabric of the ship was bending to her will. It was as if she had unlocked a part of the ship's consciousness, its lifeblood, and now it was listening to her. The reality of what she was doing began to settle in. She was controlling this ship, this alien fortress, and for the first time, she realized the full extent of her power. But the sound of footsteps behind her snapped her back to the present. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned around, only to see the aliens emerging from the shadows. They were closer now, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. Their eyes locked on her, filled with something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Sarah straightened up, refusing to show any sign of weakness. She had them on the back foot now, and she wasn't about to let them regain control. The device she had activated, the one that had unlocked the ship's systems for her, was still humming in the background, its energy filling the room like a heartbeat. The aliens might have been powerful, but they were vulnerable now. just like her. And in that moment, Sarah understood something fundamental. They were not invincible. They had underestimated her, and now they were paying the price. The leader of the aliens, the one who had always been the most vocal, stepped forward. Its eyes gleamed in the dim light, its posture tense. It raised its hand, as though it were about to issue an order, but Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed another button on the panel. The ship rumbled again, and the lights flickered. A series of doors opened in the distance, and Sarah could feel the energy shift in the room. The aliens froze, clearly taken aback by her actions. "Stop this," the leader finally spoke, its voice low and filled with a strange urgency. But Sarah could hear the uncertainty in its tone. This wasn't the commanding presence she had come to fear. It was a voice laced with doubt. "I don't think so," Sarah replied, her voice steady. She didn't recognize her own words, how calm they were, how full of defiance. But she didn't need to. She was in control now. "You took me, you experimented on me, and you thought you could break me. But you've only made me stronger." The alien's eyes narrowed, but it made no move to stop her. Instead, it seemed to hesitate, as if waiting for something. Sarah didn't wait for its next move. She had learned long ago that waiting was a luxury she couldn't afford. She pressed the final button on the panel, and the ship's systems hummed louder than ever before. A sudden surge of energy filled the room, and for a moment, everything went still. The aliens seemed to be waiting, uncertain of what was happening. Then, as if responding to Sarah's command, the ship's systems began to work in her favor. The walls trembled, and strange, alien sounds filled the air, a chorus of clicks and beeps that resonated in the very bones of the ship. The leader of the aliens took a cautious step back, its gaze flicking between Sarah and the ship. The others seemed to be shifting uncomfortably, and Sarah could feel the shift in the air, the growing tension. They were not in control anymore. In that moment, she realized something else. She didn't need to destroy them. She didn't need to fight them with brute force. What she needed was to outsmart them, to use their own ship against them. She had the advantage now. All she had to do was hold her ground, and the rest would fall into place. But then, as if to prove her right, the leader of the aliens took one more step forward. This time, it raised its hand in a gesture of something that almost resembled surrender. The others stood still, watching intently. "I underestimated you," the leader admitted. The words were almost reluctant, but they carried a weight of truth. "We did not expect you to fight back like this. You have outsmarted us." Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze fixed firmly on the leader. She didn't let herself feel the rush of victory. Not yet. This was still a delicate moment. "You made a mistake," she said softly, her voice unwavering. "You thought you could control me. But I'm not like the others." The ship hummed around her, the energy still thick in the air, and for the first time since she had been taken, Sarah felt a true sense of power. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was winning. The leader of the aliens lowered its hand slowly, as if it were accepting defeat. The others behind it seemed to follow suit, their stances less defensive, more uncertain. Sarah had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not yet. But it was her turn now. She had taken the first step, and the next move was hers to make. The aliens might have underestimated her, but they wouldn't make that mistake again.